I was sent to close the file. That is the precise nature of my assignment, and I want that recorded here before I explain why I cannot carry it out. The Orkai Political Assembly dispatched me, Envoy 3rd Grade Arevshan, Bureau of Frontier Accord, to the Cartographer's Guild Archive on Vel Karath with instructions to review 40 years of dormant human border survey records and authorize their reclassification to closed sector passive. It was administrative work, the kind given to an envoy whose career has stalled, whose last 3 postings produced nothing worth citing, and whose supervisor believed that signing a reclassification order required no particular skill. She was not wrong. She was simply working from the assumption that the file was what its cover said it was. The cover said, Tier Ledger 7 Ket, Human Space Boundary Survey, Years 1 through 40, Status, Dormant, Pending Administrative Review. I opened it on the first morning, at the long reading table in the archive's lower vault, beneath lights the color of old bone. I expected 40 years of probe return logs, sensor sweeps, distance notations in the Guild's standard margin script, kind of record that puts you to sleep in the 2nd hour and leaves your neck stiff by the 3rd. What I found in the 1st hour was a discrepancy in the timestamps. It was small, easily missed. A survey probe dispatched in Year 9 had a return read-to-seat timestamp logged 4 minutes and 11 seconds before the probe reached its designated turning point. The probe could not have sent a return signal before it turned. The physics did not permit it. I assumed a clerical error, noted it in my review log, and moved to Year 10. Year 10 had the same anomaly. Different probe, different margin. The return receipt arrived 6 minutes before turnaround. Year 11, 3 minutes and 40 seconds early. As I sat back from the table, the vault was quiet in the way only very old places are quiet, not empty but settled, as though the silence had been there long enough to acquire weight. I turned to Year 12, expecting the pattern to break. The pattern did not break. By Year 17, I had stopped looking at the probe data. I was looking only at the timestamps. They were not random. They were decreasing. The gap between receipt and turnaround was shrinking, year over year, with the slow regularity of something that was learning. In Year 1, the first anomalous receipt had arrived 22 minutes early. By Year 17, it was down to 1 minute and 50 seconds. By Year 23, it was 9 seconds. I knew by Year 23 that this was not a clerical error. I turned to Year 24 and found that the timestamps had stopped being the only anomaly. Beginning in Year 24, probe logs contained margin notations that the Guild's own surveyors had not written. They were written in perfect Guild notation. The standard glyphs S for distance, bearing, and observation class. But the content was not the Guild's content. The Guild's surveyors noted what their instruments measured. These notations noted what the Guild surveyors were doing. Year 20, Survey 3, Outer Boundary Approach. Platform observed at bearing 7 declining. Velocity consistent with deceleration foreturn. Equipment package, standard long-range acoustic and electromagnetic array, no active emitter. Observer vessel holding at boundary threshold. Crew complement, estimated 4. The Guild's crew complement on that survey had been 4. I stood up from the table. I am not certain why standing felt necessary. There was nothing in the room to stand against, nothing to face, but I stood, and I looked at the vault around me, and I thought about what I was holding. 40 years of survey logs, 40 years of the Guild watching the human border from a careful distance, believing themselves to be observers. They had never been observers. In Year 24, something on the other side had begun writing back. In the Guild's own notation, in the Guild's own margin glyph standard, detail that could only come from direct observation of the Guild's own probes. Not intercept, not inference, observation. Close enough to count the crew. I turned back to the file and read forward. Year 27. The notations began including corrections, where a Guild surveyor had logged an anomalous reading and attributed it to equipment drift. The counter-rotation, in the same margin, said instrument drift. Recommend recalibration of bearing array, port assembly, 3rd housing, corrosion at seal joint. The Guild's next maintenance report, filed 3 months later, noted corrosion at the seal joint of the port bearing array's 3rd housing. They had not been reading the Guild's maintenance reports. They had been reading the probe. Year 31. The notations began arriving before the probes did. Not by seconds, by days, year 35. A notation appeared in the log before the survey mission had been authorized by the Guild's own scheduling committee. The mission authorization had been an internal document, distributed only to senior surveyors. The counter-rotation in the margin, dated 4 days before the authorization was signed, read, Survey Mission 35 kit anticipated. Standard approach vector expected. No objection registered. No objection registered. I closed the file on year 35. My hands were steady. I have spent enough years in diplomatic chambers to keep my hands steady when I do not wish the room to know what I am thinking, and the habit holds even when the room is empty. I sat for a long time in the silence of the vault, beneath the bone-colored lights, and I thought about what to do with what I had read. The Guild did not know. That much was clear. The senior surveyors who had filed these logs had never cross-referenced the margin notations against their own scheduling documents. Why would they? Margin notations in a long-range survey archive were instrument artifacts, survey metadata, coordinate refinements. No one read them for content. No one checked whether the content matched things that had not happened yet. No one except me, because I had been sent to close a file that was supposed to be empty, and I had nothing else to do on the first morning. I opened year 36, then year 37. The notations continued, methodical and regular, arriving at intervals that corresponded. I checked again, to the Guild's internal survey planning cycle. Whoever was writing them knew the cycle, knew the authorization sequence, knew the equipment packages, the crew sizes, the approach vectors, the maintenance schedules, had known all of it for years, without once making itself known. I reached year 40, the final year of the ledger, the survey data filed 6 weeks ago by a junior cartographer who had not read the margins, and I found the last entry. It was not a counter-rotation. It was a direct address, written in Guild notation, in the standard glyph set, in the correct column format for an official record addendum, filed under the date of my arrival on Velcarath 3 days ago. I had been given the assignment 8 days ago. Travel time from the assembly to Velcarath is 5 days. The addendum read, Envoy 3rd Grader Rev Sean, Bureau of Frontier Accord. Review noted, reclassification to closed sector passive is not recommended. The record should remain open. We find the exchange informative. I closed Frontier Ledger 7 Ket. I sat for a long time before I wrote anything in my review log. Outside the vault, somewhere above me in the Guild's upper floors, I could hear the ordinary sounds of a working archive. The shift of climate systems, the faint percussion of footsteps on stone, the muffled consultation of voices that did not know what I knew. None of them had read the margins. None of them had any reason to. When I finally wrote, I wrote only one line in the review log. Classification not recommended. File to remain open, indefinitely, pending further review. I did not explain why. I did not attach the margin notations. I did not submit a report to the political assembly. I packed my materials, signed the vault's access log, and left. On the transit back to the assembly, I sat in my cabin with the door sealed and the lights low, and I thought about 40 years of the Guild, looking at the human border and believing they were alone in the looking. I thought about what it means to watch something that has always been watching you back. I thought about the addendum, dated 3 days ago, addressed to me by name, written in a notation system that belongs to us, written apparently as a courtesy. They had never needed to make themselves known. They had been content for 4 decades to read the margins we didn't read, to count our crews, to correct our instruments, to know our schedules before we did. Content to let us believe the border was silent. They had broken that silence not with a fleet, not with a transmission, not with a warning. They had broken it with a single bureaucratic note, filed in the correct column, in the correct format, addressed to the correct official, recommending that the records stay open. I have filed my counter-recommendation accordingly. The record will stay open. Do not know what to do with the fact that I am not certain which of us is the one being studied.